In Windows 10 you have local accounts. These exist only on the local computer. You can manage these accounts by using Computer Management, the Settings app, or Windows PowerShell. Open up Computer Management by right-clicking Start and clicking Computer Management, and then under Computer Management in the Local Users and Groups node you can see the users and groups for you to manage. Common tasks might include configuring a full name, disabling the account, resetting the password, or modifying group memberships. You can use the Settings app to manage your local accounts as well. Open up Settings, click Accounts, and then on Your Info tab you can modify the basic properties of the signed-in user account, including associating the account with a Microsoft account. On the Email and App Accounts page you can add additional accounts for accessing email accounts. We've already seen the sign-in options page. So on the Access Work or School account you can associate particular accounts such as an Azure AD account, you can enroll the device in device management, and you can access provisioning packages. The Family and Other People tab allows you to create additional accounts or rather add additional accounts to the local computer. Domain accounts exist on a domain controller. These accounts can be used on any computer which is part of an ADDS forest. You can manage these accounts using the Active Directory Users for Computers tool, Active Directory Administrative Center, and the Windows PowerShell Active Directory module. There are a vast array of properties you can configure for domain accounts. On the General tab you can configure the first name, last name, display name, and other basic information about the account. On the Account tab you can specify the user logon name and the user logon name pre-Windows 2000 and the user principal name. The user logon name is the name that the user will use to sign into a given domain, in this case @pearson.com. The user principal name is the combination of the user logon name and the UPN suffix, in this case @pearson.com. So a user can also sign in using their UPN, which in this instance would be warrenaj@pearson.com. You can configure logon hours and logon to, which specifies which particular computers a user can use to access the network. If an account is locked, you can unlock it. And you can also specify an account expiration date and other characteristics about the account options. On the Profile tab, you can specify the user profile path. This enables a user's desktop settings and application settings to be stored in a centralized location and for those settings to roam with the user between computers that are part of the domain. Account policies. You can use these to configure a password policy which enforces a password history, a minimum password age, a maximum password age, a minimum password length, password complexity requirements, and so on. You can also define an account lockout policy. This is what happens when a user enters a number of bad passwords in a measured period of time. The audit policy must be configured if you want to enable auditing. Auditing will track access of objects, such as file system objects. It will also track logon events and account management events. The User Rights Assignment node allows you to configure rights. Rights can be considered as management permissions or abilities. Some of these are quite simple, so the ability to log on locally is something you would want to assign as a right to users for most user computers. But you wouldn't want to assign the right to log on locally on domain controllers. So user rights are abilities. And finally, security options. These allow us to define behavior such as the ability to mount devices, the ability to use user account control in a certain way. And these settings allow us to exert a bit more control over account behavior and abilities. In the demonstration, I'll show you how to manage local accounts, how to manage domain accounts, and how to configure account policies. You can manage user accounts and local user accounts in a number of different ways. Open up Settings, click Accounts, and then you can use the Family and Other People to add additional accounts. So you can add someone else to this PC. You can even set up something called Assigned Access, which restricts that particular user account to a specific app. I tend to use Computer Management. If I right-click Start and choose Computer Management, you can see the local users and groups that you can configure. To create a new user, right click and choose New User and then enter the user's details. That password. And then password properties. If the user account is not going to be used immediately, disable the account and then enable it when it's ready for use. And now I can sign in using that user account. To manage domain accounts, you need to sign in at a domain controller and use the Server Manager tool to access either Active Directory users or computers, the Active Directory module for Windows PowerShell, or the Active Directory Administrative Center. Alternatively, if you've got the remote server administration tools installed on your Windows 10 computer, you can do it from the local computer, so long as that computer is domain joined. The alternative is to establish a remote desktop connection to the server and then access the tools. I favour using Active Directory users and computers, but for the exam you need to be familiar with that and also the Administrative Center. The big difference between local accounts and domain accounts, or one of the many differences, is that you have to define a container for the domain account. By default, users are stored in the user's built-in container and computers within the computer's built-in container. But you may want to create organizational units to give some structure to the way your users are organized. These may be based along organizational lines, such as a department, or along geographical lines. Once you've created your organizational unit structure, you can add users to it by right-clicking and choosing New and then choosing User. And then defining a user ID. Notice that the user IDs, there are several user IDs here. We've got the user logon name, we've got a suffix, which is the domain name, and then we've got a pre-Windows 2000 sign-in name. That's just the name without the suffix. So the user logon name is James, the user principal name is james@pearson.com, and then the pre-Windows 2000 logon name is James, but with the prefix of Pearson/. Enter a password, and then set whether or not the user can change the password and whether it expires. As before, if the account's not going to immediately be used, you should disable the account until it's ready for use. Common management tasks for users include resetting a password, temporarily disabling the account, modifying group memberships. If a user enters too many bad passwords in a too short a period of time, the account will lock out. You can also unlock an account as well. That does not appear here until the account is locked. If I view the properties of an account, there's a lot more I can configure. Aside from sort of generic properties like addressing information and country and so forth, I can also define account properties. These are the user logon names and pre-2000 logon names. I can configure logon hours, which allows me to restrict when the account can be used. I can specify which computers can be used by the user. And there you can see the option to unlock the account if it's become locked. I can also set an expiration date for an account. So if I've got someone who's going to work for the organization for 3 months, I can set end of and then specify, I don't know, sometime in July for the account to expire. The Profile tab allows me to configure a logon script for the user. We don't tend to use that anymore. Rather, we tend to rely on scripts being used through group policy objects. So that tends to remain empty. The profile path is the path that the user's desktop settings will be retrieved from. It's a roaming profile path, and that normally consists of a UNC name that points to a server, and then a shared folder, and then usually we use the username variable. I won't click OK to this because I haven't set up that shared folder, but that %username %variable will be translated to, in this case, James. If the profile path doesn't exist, that's to say the James part of it doesn't exist. So long as the //dc server exists and the /users folder exists, shared folder, it will create this subfolder called James. I can have the home folder connected to automatically by using this option down here, connect. I tend to use drive H for home, and then I would also specify a UNC name to point to the variable %username. And once again, that would change to James once I'd created the underlying shared folders. Group memberships are very important for user accounts. We tend to assign permissions and rights to group users, to groups of which users are members. That means the administrative effort is considerably less. So once you've set up all of your users and groups, it's then necessary to configure account policies. This is a group policy function. So if you open up the Group Policy Management Editor for the default domain policy, you do that by navigating through the Group Policy Management console to the default domain policy and then choosing Edit. Under Policies in the computer configuration, under Windows Settings, you can configure security settings, and the account policies consist of the account policy node, which is a password policy. You can enforce a password history. You can specify a maximum password age and a minimum password age. That prevents users from changing their password to the old password straight away. Minimum password length and complexity requirements, and whether or not passwords are stored using reversible encryption. Generally, you want to turn that off because it's not very secure. The account lockout policy, which is also part of the account policy, determines whether or not you're tracking bad password attempts. So you might want to configure that value here to say the account is locked for 30 minutes after 5 invalid logon attempts, and then the account is reset automatically after 30 minutes. So when I enabled the first policy, it suggested to configure the others. So it's automatically done that for me now. So if a user enters 5 bad passwords in a 30-minute period, his account or her account will be locked for 30 minutes or until an administrator unlocks it. The Kerberos policy is used to describe or to control ticketing. When a user signs in, they obtain a Kerberos ticket, and we can control the lifetime of that ticket. Okay, so essentially a ticket is as the name suggests, it allows you to present your user information to servers for the purposes of validation for resources on that server. You obtain a ticket by signing in a domain controller, and then you present the ticket to other servers in the domain. So you can control some of the properties there. In addition to account policies, you can also set local policies. This includes auditing. By default, auditing is turned off, as you can see here, because it imposes somewhat of a load on the domain controller and on participating servers. Every time a resource is accessed, we have to track that information and report it back to the audit trail. That goes into the security log in Event Viewer. But you can see here that you can audit logon events. The account logon events are domain sign-ins and logon events are local sign-ins. You can audit privileged use, where you try to do something that requires elevation, and you can track system events. Object access is important for the exam. Auditing object access means files and printers. So if you want to track someone accessing a file or a printer, even if that's a failed attempt, you first of all have to turn on object auditing here. So audit object access, you enable that. Then in the file system, you can configure what type of access you want to track. So that's a two-stage process. User rights are the ability to perform management tasks. Some of these are fairly basic, so the ability to change the system time, that might be something you're happy for your users to do. In actual fact, I'd recommend caution, because time is a very critical factor in lots of domain-wide activities. But for example, the ability to log on locally on a workstation is something you probably do want to allow your users to do. Without that right, they can't sign in. But you probably wouldn't want them to have that right on a domain controller. So you'd want to be careful about assigning the allow logon locally right within a group policy that are impinged on domain controller objects. You can scroll through all of these and see all the different sorts of rights. And as I say, they're sort of like management privileges. The ability to take ownership of files and other objects is a good example. So if you have the right to take ownership, even if you don't have the take ownership file permission, you can still take ownership. And if you remember, if you can take ownership of a file object, you can assign permissions on it, including blocking other people from having access. And security options, we touched on this earlier, but you can talk about things like user account control, and you can configure that behavior. But also you can configure lots of settings to do with NTLM authentication and other network access, and interactive logon and domain membership details. Far too much to go through here, but prior to taking the test, it's maybe worth having a quick look. In the demonstration, you saw how to manage local accounts, how to manage domain accounts, and how to configure account policies. A Microsoft account provides you with an identity that you can use to sign in on multiple devices and access online services. After you connect your Microsoft account with your local account, you can access personal Microsoft Cloud services such as OneDrive or Outlook.com and any other personal apps. You can access Microsoft Intune, Microsoft Office 365, and Azure. You can download and install apps from the Microsoft Store, although you don't require a Microsoft account to browse the store. You can also choose to sync your settings between devices that are linked to your account. You can associate a Microsoft account in two separate ways. Firstly, to your local account, or alternatively to your domain account. To connect Microsoft accounts to a domain account, use the following procedure. First of all, sign in using a domain account and open the Settings app. On the Accounts page, click Your Info. Click Sign in with a Microsoft account. On the Connect to a Microsoft account on this PC page, select the PC settings you want to sync with the domain. Enter your Microsoft account credentials. You'll need to verify your Microsoft account, which might require multi-factor authentication, such as receiving a text or making a phone call. Click Connect to associate your Microsoft account with your domain account. Once you've done this, or conversely associated it with a local account, you can sync your settings with your Microsoft account. Open the Settings app. On the Accounts node, open the Sync Your Settings tab and then specify that you want to sync your settings. You can then sync the theme, Internet Explorer settings, passwords, language preferences, ease of access, and other miscellaneous Windows settings.